Welcome back to another episode of the Israel Connection. Ever since October 7th, Israel is at war. Things are unclear, very vague, and it is become increasingly more and more difficult to cover everything that's happening, but we're still going to do our best to provide that with this episode. Here we go. Hello, everybody. Good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome to another Israel Connection session. And first off, um, I want to say a few words about last week. I know that it was one of the lowest, like in energy. It was definitely for me one of the most depressing sessions. It was very, very hard to try and focus on the positive, to try and stay optimistic with all the current news, which is interesting because it was also the Monday after the release of some of the hostages. And you would have expected from an Israeli seeing Israelis go freely from being taken hostage, to be joyful and ecstatic about this. But the truth is, saying how painful that process is and how inhumane the factor that has taken them hostage really wasn't enabling me to be happy about this. I saw all the images of the hostages in the past that were freed in the past few days, and I'll tell you, these are remarkable images of families being reunited. And over the past week, which is really, really interesting, some of the kids that were released have already uploaded TikToks, even making some form of a dark humor out of it, saying, "What did I miss?" and stuff and stuff like this. So it's been it is an emotional roller coaster. It's continued to be an emotional roller coaster for me, for everybody. Some days are going to be better than others, some days are going to be darker, and apparently that Monday session was one of those. And today's session, I was actually going to read you some information from the embassy. So the Jewish agency has started working with the Israel embassy here in DC area, which is a really, really valuable partnership because we get some really good, valuable information from them regarding to the situation on the ground. And I wanted to read some of those details to you because I think they're going to be very, very valuable for the discussion follows. Starting with obviously the numbers, we know of more than 1,200 Israelis killed since October 7th. 400 of them are fallen soldiers. 75 of them were killed during inaction in the ground operation. Ever since the IDF has entered Gaza in a ground operation, 75 IDF soldiers have been killed. That's a lot. Over 5,500 Israelis were wounded since October 7th, and we know of still 137 hostages confirmed to be in Hamas captives, while in the past week, during the ceasefire, during the humanitarian break, 86 Israeli hostages were released and 24 foreign national hostages were released, overall numbering at 110, with three more bodies of hostages who were murdered in captivity have been returned to Israel, which means those are people that were known to be taken captive and were killed under Hamas captive. The military operation has been going on ever since Hamas has broke the ceasefire and fired a barrage of rockets over Israel, over 200 rockets. The IDF is definitely sure that those rockets were an immediate result of the ceasefire. Having 10 days of humanitarian break for Hamas allowed them to rearm themselves, restate some of those rocket units, and eventually use them to fire rockets in Israel. Israel has been bombarded by Hamas in the past few days, while the IDF has continued the operation in Gaza. And I wanted to focus on some of the more interesting details regarding humanitarian aid, because I think those are not usually what we discuss when we're talking about the military operation in Gaza. The first one is that the Red Cross has finally released a statement saying that they're trying to gain access for the hostages, something that hasn't happened in the past 2 months. We know that there has been a lot of protests in front of Red Cross offices across the US, in Israel as well. And it seems that it might be starting to affect a change in policy. Now, we're still a far route from seeing an actual change in policies, but admitting that Hamas was not allowing the Red Cross access to the hostages is a very, very interesting first step from their perspective. Also, some of the women's rights groups are starting to give any notions to the events of October 7th, which is encouraging. Not because we trust them again, but because it is a first small change in policy and in behavior from those organizations. So I really want to encourage all of you, I'll do the same as well, to try and keep track of the changes in those policies. We are light years away from seeing any type of changes in policy from the UN, which is a different story, a different conversation, and we can have that as well, but it's also heavily infected by non-democratic countries. But it is a change, and a change is good. Now, regarding humanitarian aid, over 10,000 tons of food has entered Gaza Strip ever since October 7th. Over 3,000 tons of medical equipment and 5,500 tons of equipment of temporary shelter has entered Gaza, monitored by Israel, and allowed to be entered into Gaza. Over 3,900 tons of water and 2,400 tons of mixed aid entered Gaza. And I want to emphasize all of those numbers because they're immense, they're huge. This is not something we've seen in the past. And this shows you that even with or with the humanitarian break, even with or without the ceasefire, all of those humanitarian aid facilities were allowed to enter Gaza. The ceasefire was not in order to allow more humanitarian aid to enter Gaza, but to help Hamas regroup. And one more interesting detail that really kind of like spot out for me, and I wanted to share with you on this one. This one is regards the IDF notices to Gaza residents. The IDF called the residents of northern Gaza to evacuate south of Wadi Gaza by dropping 1.5 million flyers, recording 6 million voice messages, sending 4 million text messages, and conducting 20,000 phone calls, and opening multiple corridors of Gaza civilians to go south. More than 900,000 Gaza civilians left the northern part of Gaza despite of Hamas prevention. Try to recollect of all that information. This is how big the effort was to prevent loss of human life in the Gaza Strip even before the ground operation has started. Millions of calls, texts, and flyers were initiated by the IDF in order to save life. This is some of the information that was released by the Israel Embassy. If any one of you wants to have the full report, you are more than welcome. I can send it to you by email. I'm not sharing this globally because obviously some of it is a bit sensitive, but I think personally it's fine. It's just mainly information to send. And I would love your comments and reactions about this one. And if not, we're just gonna move on to talk about another interesting article I found, which is about the data here in the US. Was any part of this information surprising to you?
Yeah, very much so. it's not what the media is reporting. I'm sure that's not a surprise to anybody. But what the media has been saying is that Israel has not provided any safe havens, that where they've been telling the Gaza citizens to go is still under attack. And so, there's just a disconnect between, I think, what I'm seeing in the media and the kind of reporting that you're giving us on the precautions that the IDF is taking.
Yeah, feel the same way. And I think that that's part of the discontent we're having eventually. There's almost two worlds existing that are parallel and they're not touching, like what's happening on the ground and what's being reported, and it's extremely frustrating. Yeah. Any more notions or reactions regarding to what has happened in Israel in the past week that you want to bring forth to the group? You're more than welcome to do so. Or
Yeah,
questions that you have.
did anybody see Dana Bash's interview with Representative Jayapal yesterday? That was repeated on Morning Joe this morning.
Yeah, I did.
Okay. For those who didn't see it, and I'm sure that it's on YouTube and you can probably get it on MSNBC. Basically, what Jayapal said, she was trying to make it, tell me if I'm wrong, Judge. She was trying to make a moral equivalent between the raping of Israeli women and the killing of and the deaths of the Palestinians. And Dana tried to get her off of that, basically, and saying, no, there is no moral equivalent. I mean, there is no, they raped, but, and because she kept on saying, and even though, and she kept on trying, the representative kept on trying to make a moral equivalent to the two. And I actually did write to my congressman, haven't heard back from him yet, about how deplorable that was, that she was trying to make a moral equivalent between the two things. And anyway, that's the biggest thing that I heard that just upset me no end.
And she's a representative.
I found that very
representative?
shocking also. Sorry.
Oh,
From
sorry,
Washington
Josh.
State. And
Yeah.
she's head of the Progressive Democrats.
Mhm.
Yeah, I found that very shocking also. And how should I say it? She could simply have said what Hamas did is absolutely horrible and unacceptable. And at the same time, we are concerned about the deaths of thousands of Palestinians as a result of what's happened. But she didn't stop there. She kept pushing back and saying, we can't, have different are you trying to establish a gradient of atrocities or things like that? It's very upsetting also. I saw that. In fact,
So, and also the UN today, I believe, is meeting on the issue of the rapes, and some of the countries are starting to finally pay attention to what happened.
As I said, those are very small gestures, but they are a sign of change. Hopefully, eventually, it's going to lead to change of policies and change of perspectives. But yeah, I think a large part of this is that we're now trying to tackle almost like a 50 years gap of knowledge regarding to the conflict, 50 years of information that was lacking, and like whole generations that was rose on a narrative that was false regarding to the situation, narrative that was imbued with anti-Semitism as well, that was capable of double standard in Israel compared to other countries, and also the fact that a lot of it it's just because we didn't present our case. in addition to all of this, I'm not sure what's the right relationship between who did what exactly, but we definitely saw a neglecting piece from the Israel's policy of foreign affairs in the past decades. It's also true. So I think all of those togethers, ignorance mixed with hatred, mixed with anti-Semitism, mixed with lack of efforts from the Israeli side, all of that together has led us to this point right here that now it seems that we're trying to fix in days and weeks a complete gap of information and notions of 40 years. And sometimes it's frustrating when people here are saying Jews are not indigenous to Israel, and we're literally celebrating the birth of a Jewish person in Bethlehem 2,000 years ago. Um, it's just
I heard
absurd sometimes.
something very interesting. I'm doing a short study on Hanukkah with somebody from Moment Magazine. And one thing that he said that I found fascinating was the fact that the Arabs consider any place that they've lived to be theirs, regardless who lived before them or who came after them. If they were there at any time, then it's their land. And that's why they consider what is Israel and what is the
Yeah.
Gaza Strip and what is the West Bank consider their land because they lived there at one time, irregardless of who lived there before them, which I thought was very interesting.
Yeah. Again, there's a lot of different circumstances that led to the situation that we're experiencing today. It is what it is, and we have to push through. So one more thing that I found really, really interesting, and I can send this to you if you want to read the article. It was an article published in it was an opinion article published in the Jerusalem Post, written by Dan Albaum, sorry. He is the executive director of the Jewish Agency in the US, in North America. And he wrote a really, really interesting piece, says who can and who cannot we trust after October 7th. He's stating very, very clearly that all of those humanitarian aid organizations, campuses, and large international media are not to be trusted. But he also emphasizes who can we trust. And this one is the more interesting piece. Recent surveys that he mentions, and I can look through the details to show exactly where it comes from, but he stated that 80% of Americans supports Israel. 80%. The majority of political leaders from both the Democratic and the Republican part of the Congress and the Senate supports Israel. And we saw this on the rally 2 weeks ago as well. Both leaders of the Democratic majority and the Republican majority, in addition to the Senate representatives, all of them supported Israel and stated that Israel has the right to defend itself. That survey dives into details and shows that within 20s and 30s, people at their age of 20s and 30s, that numbers goes down, and it's only 65%, which is still a majority. And around teens, it is going down to 55, but still a majority. For me, that's actually encouraging. That's reassuring. I thought things are even worse than that. But knowing that the majority of teens, the majority of young adults, and the majority of Americans in general supports Israel, and representatives doing the same thing, emphasize that all that we hear is still a minority. It is very, very loud. It is very aggressive and very violent minority, but it is still a minority. And that gives a lot of room to be encouraged to try and talk with people about this. It means that on the other side, whether it's the peers, your colleagues, people right next to you, all of those opportunities are offered for us to try and have that conversation afterwards about the situation. Because not all people believes that Israel is demon and all Jewish people are to blame for that. A lot of people do, but it's still not the majority of people. And that is encouraging. I was surprised to hear those numbers. And I would love to hear your reactions. What do you think about that? It is, I'm going to see if I can put it on the chat so you can see it if you're interested. This is the article from the Jerusalem Post.
Okay, Dean, Dean, a two-part question. Tomorrow at, I don't know if you saw this or not. I got this email from the JCRC, Jewish. I guess it's the Jewish community of Greater Washington. I'm sort of, yeah. There's going to be an event tomorrow at Rodolph Shalom. Did you see it or?
Wasn't it the 14th? The
No.
laws and legislators, you mean?
No. That's the 14th about what's going on.
Yeah.
That's Virginia Legislative Breakfast. Apparently tomorrow evening, Rodolph Shalom is having some type of, I guess, of tomorrow evening at 7:00. Partners in Faith, Arab and Jews working for a shared future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm looking right now at the JCRC's newsletter.
Okay, do you have any concerns? I know you were breaking down the numbers about the support for Israel, and then I guess you were breaking it down by age groups. I think that there are some of the people in the Jewish community, maybe under 30, who are maybe forming some type of groups with some of the Palestinian groups, maybe some type of dialogues. Do you have any concern about that? The younger American, the people in the American Jewish community, maybe under 30, maybe not be sympathetic to Israel?
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any concerns about that?
Yes. And my job is to be concerned about this. This is specifically the issue right now.
Yeah.
There is a very, very big there is some gap existing right now between how past generations of Jewish communities felt about Israel and how teenagers are feeling nowadays, teenagers and young adults. And we definitely saw that gap going for wider and wider in the past 10, 20 years. Definitely. And the reality of social media doesn't help at all with the ignorance and hatred towards Jewish people that some of those teens are also adopting. And this is, by the way, a brilliant program. It sounds really, really interesting. I'm just looking through. I see that it is a joint program with the New Israel Fund. So if you're interested, go for it. I think it's going to be quite a thing. But I also want to talk a little bit about my work. So in the past 2 months, I've actually been reaching out to a lot of teens in religious schools, specifically teens, not young adults. Because we knew how valuable that point of time is. Those are the people with the most, let's call it exposure to the situation, and with the least amount of context, right? Whether what they're seeing on social media and what they hear from their peers and their friends and what they hear from their parents, and with the least amount of information regarding to what's actually happening on the ground. So that's what we have been trying to tackle. And I can tell you, I came out encouraged out of every one of those conversations. Yesterday, it was with 13 years olds, by the way, at Rodolph Shalom. And it was remarkable seeing how knowledgeable, how critical, and how proud they were to be Jewish and to want to connect to Israel. More than you would have thought. So the numbers are scary. The numbers are definitely true and alarming when we see the overall kind of like notion of the Jewish people, and when you see organizations like Jewish Voice for Peace, or If Not Now, that are seems to be almost like advocates for Hamas now, and definitely voting for ceasefire and to support the Palestinians and not acknowledging any of that atrocities happening in Israel. But it still seems to be like not the majority of Jewish people, which I found to be encouraging. I don't know if that answers your question as much as I could, um, but it's what I've been experiencing so far.
Yeah, 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 yeah. It does, but I think you know, you know, my opinion is that when you have big metropolitan areas like DC, New York, you have a lot of people from different ethnic groups. There's a lot of people, particularly in the DC area, Fairfax County. There's a good number of them where English is not their first language, regardless of where they come from. So you have a lot of people from all backgrounds,
Yep.
regardless whether Jewish or not. So
Yeah, it's a very diverse area, and
yeah,
it raises some issues. We know exactly what's happening in schools and high schools. We also those images. We also children drawing swastikas. I mean, just last night when we asked the kids, again, 13 years old that goes to religious school, and all of them goes to public school. Not a lot of them goes to Gesher. And when we asked how many of them were exposed to anti-Semitism, whether it's something about uh, Palestine or something about Jews, almost each and every one of them raised their hand. Almost all of them experienced some form of anti-Semitism, whether it was deliberately or as a joke. None of them you know, are feeling as safe as it could be in schools here in Northern Virginia, not in DC, not New York, here. And that is alarming. So teenagers in general, yes, I'm extremely worried about this, especially because only 55% supports Israel, right? That means that a lot of them don't, and a lot of them are relying on disinformation coming from social media, which is a huge deal, especially here in the US, when you don't have that much of good Israel education to try and get all the context that is valuable and to understand the complexity of the situation here, causing this pro-Israel, pro-Palestine thing, thinking that you can, support one side and not the other. So, but at least the teens that I've been spoken with that goes to religious school, and know that this is a very, very filtered environment for me. I was encouraged. I gained some of the optimism that I was lacking, and I hope that it gives you some some optimism as well. Hearing that, that generation is not as lost as we think it is, especially those who I've met with. So, it's not a lot, but it's something. And I think every small thing that we can use to leverage the spirits, to get encouraged, to feel optimistic, I'll take it.
The figures that you mentioned from the Jerusalem Post article, and I guess I'll have to go and find it. It's not showing up in my chat. I guess.
Send it again.
All right. Thank you very much. I guess I have seen other surveys that are a lot less encouraging, and I think the other side of it is that some of the other surveys, Dean, break down responses based on political affiliation.
Always.
And you may be aware of this, that support among people who identify as Democrats now is lower than support from either Republicans or independents. I guess this is the problem with the progressive disenchantment with Israel.
Mhm.
And that's why actually it's valuable that there are quite a few progressive Democratic legislators who have been advocating for Israel. I will also add this. I am not aware of any changes in his views, but I will certainly say that my past interactions with Jerry Connolly have been very favorable. He's an Israeli supporter. He's obviously not fond of Netanyahu, but on the other hand, he's a very clear supporter of Israel. Has come out in favor of a number of Jewish activities. I know he's shown up in the past at Jewish Federation fundraising events.
Mhm.
So those of us who are in the 11th district would argue we have a pro-Israeli legislator. If you're a ZOA advocate, you may not like him so much, but he is clearly pro-Israel. And I did find it, again, as I said earlier, shocking to hear how Representative Pripal handled herself on Sunday.
Yeah.
If I find any of these other surveys, I'll stick them in the chat, but thanks.
Yeah, and of course, as you're saying, every survey should be taken with a grain of salt. All of them are biased. All of them try to show a narrative, a opinion, and the institute that released them always going to manipulate the data in a way that favors their initial study for the majority of the time. But they're still trying to be as, let's call it, I don't know, as transparent as possible, maybe regarding the information. But yeah, definitely it is very, very alarming seeing the way that the progressive democratic part of the left in the US, at least, is now siding with Hamas, is siding with, well, not necessarily with Hamas. Again, this is a very radical choice, but a lot of them do support Gaza, do support the Palestinians, and trying to show Israel as a demon and as this conqueror that commits genocide, which is just not true. It is very alarming. But at least now, according to today, from from the national sphere of the U.S., it seems that the majority of legislators from both sides of the map are supporting Israel to an extent. Obviously, not 100%, including here in the Jewish world as well. Yeah, go ahead, Phyllis.
Yeah, I was also going to say, now I'm trying to remember what I was going to say. Oh, yeah, one thing that the news is doing is I don't hear for any calls from any news organization for Hamas to stop bombing Israel or attacking Israel. And I find that very interesting. Everybody wants a ceasefire, but nobody's calling for Hamas to stop attacking Israel.
Yep. So, one more interesting details regarding to how we view this information on the media that I found very interesting is what is the source of information that a lot of those international medias are drawing their facts from. So when regarding reports coming in from Gaza, the majority of them draws their reports from the Gaza Ministry of Health, eventually the one reporting about the number of casualties in Gaza. And the alarming thing is, and I'm still surprised why all of those medias like the New York Times, BBC, and others, very, very big international medias, don't double check that information. The Ministry of Gaza is controlled by Hamas. They do not differentiate the cause of death for the casualties. Everything is labeled under Israel aggression. They do not differentiate Hamas fighters, includes women and children. Children could be a 17-year-old with a gun. It doesn't have to be a 3-year-old. They do not differentiate them from civilians. They do not differentiate whether they were killed by a jihad missiles that was misfired at a hospital or by Israeli aggression. Everything is labeled under Israeli aggression. And I think that this is a large piece of why we're seeing that biases from international media. They rather rely on information coming from an organization rather than the one coming from a democratic countries. It's just infuriating. Yeah, go ahead, Gabe.
Yeah, just to make one point, I'll mention one of the things that I said, I think in the note that I sent to you over the weekend, where everybody's telling Israel to stop fighting. If Hamas would release the hostages and stop attacking Israel and disarm and promise not to attack Israel, then Israel would stop the fighting. I mean, what came to mind is if you have a nest of rattlesnakes living outside your house, you're going to want to eradicate the rattlesnakes. And so for Israel, Hamas living next door and promising, not even threatening, but promising to continue attacking is like having a nest of rattlesnakes. And if they genuinely wanted peace, release the hostages, stop attacking Israel, and promise not to attack Israel, and then everybody can talk. And not enough people. I've seen hints of that in opinion pieces, but nobody has said explicitly that Hamas has the on-off switch, and all Hamas has to do is join civilization, and then the fighting can stop, and there can be discussion of what follows.
That's definitely the formal stand. But the truth is, after October 7th, the IDF goal is to destroy Hamas, disarm Hamas in Gaza completely. And you're absolutely right. You know, we've been saying this since the 70s. Golda Meir said it. The moment they lay down their weapons, there will be peace. The moment we lay down our weapons, will be dead. It's still true nowadays. Israel seeks peace. Israel seeks security for all. And it's going to continue to do. But I'm not sure that the existing form of Hamas can be allowed to continue to exist. And that revolves into a larger question, which is what's going to happen afterwards, after the military operation is over. Because the IDF goal is very, very clear: disarm Hamas, destroy every possible way of Hamas to attack Israel again in Gaza. Right? It's a very clear goal. It's a very difficult one. It's going to take months to do. Right? We're over a month of military operation, ground operation in the northern part of the Strip, and they still hasn't covered all of Hamas's spots there.
Do you think that Israel will be able to do that with the unavoidable and tragic collateral damage of so many Gazans being killed? Do you think
that's the military operation?
I understand, and I understand why it's happening. I'm thinking of just world pressure, whether or not it's legitimate, what people are saying to condition continued U.S. aid to Israel. I'm just asking what you think of it as as an achievable goal, given the cost and given the larger consequences. I mean, I'm not in any way saying Israel is doing anything wrong, because, as I said, it's under Hamas control. But I'm just wondering, other than just turning all of Gaza into rubble, I'm somewhere between optimistic and pessimistic about Israel being able to achieve its goal before external conditions force it to stop.
So again, try to imagine the reality in Gaza. Over 70% of Gazan residents support Hamas. Again, those numbers change radically between different polls, but the reality that we have to acknowledge is the fact that over 50% of Gaza residents are under 18, and Hamas has been ruling Gaza since 2005, meaning there is a whole generation, and it is a lot of people in Gaza that was raised by Hamas. They're raised filled with hatred and filled with indoctrination of hate towards Israel and Jewish people, which means that they're going to be very, very big advocates for Hamas. In addition, acknowledge the fact that everybody who resists Hamas is probably not there anymore in Gaza, meaning that the majority of population you have there is collaborating in some way with Hamas, whether willing or not. That's happening. That's one thing. in order to decrease the amounts of life that have been spent when every time the Israeli Air Force is striking, that's the ground operation, going from one house to another, eliminating all sources of security, and evacuating all of the citizens from the northern part of the strip to the southern part, is what Israel do in order to minimize the loss of lives in this operation. The fact that we're risking troops' lives and the fact that there's more than 75 soldiers dead already since the ground operation started is Israel's way to minimize the risk of civilians while still disarming Hamas. Now, whether if Israel stops right now, other countries are going to get involved and try to disarm Hamas from an international pressure, is that going to happen? In my personal perspective, no. Right? Hamas has been ruling Gaza for 20 years, and it's not going to stop. Is Hamas an organization that we can reason with, creates a form of diplomatic relationship? No, not after October 7th. So for me as an Israeli who sees the intensity of the situation, do I view any diplomatic future with Hamas? I don't. And that means that the only other way of approaching it is by disarming Hamas and finding an exchangeable solution, whether that be Israeli rule, whether that be Palestinian Authority rule, whether that be a foreign country getting involved, whether it's one of the Arabic countries or a Western country. There's a lot of different possibilities, but Israel recognized that it cannot be Hamas anymore. Hamas cannot be reasoned with, it cannot be trusted. Israel even, I think someone from the government has initiated a state that it's also going to try and eliminate Hamas officials in Turkey and other Arabic countries where they are being hidden there. Israel, the IDF goals is simple: disarm Hamas, and it's going to continue to do so in my beliefs until that happens in Gaza Strip. If the American support is going to stop, then we're gonna have an issue. If America is going to stop Israel from retrieving all of the hostages that are still missing, there's over 130 hostages still in Gaza today. Some children are there too. Some parents that their children were set free are still in hostage in Gaza. Hamas has been not respecting any agreements it's been had with Israel in the past. It is not respecting agreements it has with the Red Cross, and somehow they still operate and provide humanitarian aid to Gaza. So I don't know. I really don't. It's hard to see a viable solution for the long run here. Each and one of those solutions that we're trying to imagine, whether it's a foreign country, Israel, Palestinian Authority, or just remain Gaza as it is, none of them is perfect. None of them is ideal. But something is going to have to change. That is very clear.
When you describe the percentage of Gazans that support Hamas, it's not clear what disarming Hamas really means when you might have to disarm the entire population.
Disarm means eliminate all weapons and abilities to fire missiles over Israel. It means destroy tunnels, confiscate weapons, and confiscate missiles. Those are viable targets. Disarming does not mean disarming mentally or emotionally. It means disarming physically. That's why it's complicated, because that goal is achievable. Make sure there's not a single gun in Gaza is something that the IDF can do. It's going to take a while. It's very, very difficult, but it is something that is viable. Make sure that Gazans empathize Israel. That's a whole nother thing. And that's why the long-run solution, or the policy-making solution, right, is the difficult one. But yeah, I agree with you. It's going between extremely optimistic to extremely pessimistic about this. And we're just gonna have to push through. We're gonna have to continue to believe that eventually things will get better. We're gonna have to continue to act here to make sure that things will get better for Jewish folks here in Northern Virginia. Whether it's advocacy work, such as Phyllis mentioned, to reach out to your local legislator, make sure that they know that they have Jewish voices in Northern Virginia that counts. Another survey that I saw that was very interesting was that over 60% of Jewish people in America have a close relationship with someone who's either evacuated, hurt, killed, or taken hostage in Israel. Try to imagine how close the relationship is that the majority of Americans were impacted by October 7th personally. And we need to remind those legislators of that. We need to remind everybody who creates policies here that it is viable, that they acknowledge the fact that we don't feel safe here, that we encourage them immensely to support Israel and to support a viable solution for the long run. That's definitely part of that. And we need to be mindful of all of that. But it's Hanukkah, and we are the Maccabees now. The Jewish people has faced atrocities in the past. It is facing atrocities now, and we've always prevailed, and we're going to continue to prevail because that's what we do. And I think the notion of everybody tried to kill us, they couldn't do it, let's eat, going to be viable again for October 7th eventually. We have to push through, have to continue to be encouraged, and to believe that things will get better and act on it. So I do hope to see all of you again next Monday. I'm going to remind you all again that on the Monday of Christmas weekend and the Monday of New Year's, there's not going to be an Israel Connections session. The JCC is going to be closed. So looking forward to see you all next week. Have a happy Hanukkah. We're going to do a candle lighting every night at the JCC at 4:45 if you're interested in coming. We're going to have a huge candlelight on the 14th of December at Mosaic. You can go to the website. You'll see the information about this. I really hope to see all of you in Mosaic on the 14th. There's going to be sufganiyot, hot chocolate. It's going to be very cold, so bring your coat. But it is a moment to share light, even with everything else is dark. And I think it couldn't be more metaphorical to the situation as we're experiencing right now. It is the holiday of light, and we're intending to make it special. Happy to see you all. Have a great rest of your week. Make sure that this week is better than the one before. And see you all next Monday.